Hello, All Souls Con. I'm Nikki, and joining me on a Brady Bunch screen somewhere are Janet and Ashley, and we are All Souls Witchy Women. This is our first year presenting at All Souls Con, and we had hoped that it would be from a stage in Philadelphia together, but 2020 had different ideas. We miss each other terribly, and we had hoped that this con would give us a chance to be together and have an All Souls Witchy Women coven meeting. To be clear, those meetings are usually just wine, charcuterie, gin, lots of hugs, music, all things that are better shared with friends. So, since we can't be together physically, we decided to take these moments with you and make them as much like one of our own meetings as possible, where we talk about the books that we love and how Deborah Harkness gets us, how we embrace all the characters in the books, and how we are convinced that within each of us lies a little bit, or maybe a lot, of magic. We've made ourselves comfortable, and we hope that you will too. Welcome to our coven meeting as we discuss the ways that All Souls Trilogy can help us unleash our inner magic. If you've listened to our podcast, you know that one of our favorite things to do is to pick a thread from the books and talk about how those things relate to our own lives. We're going to do the same thing here today. We're going to start with the stories that we tell ourselves. So we all tell ourselves stories, don't we? And we believe the stories that other people tell us too. Sometimes this is good, but sometimes these stories can hold us back and prevent us from growing or fully understanding and appreciating our skills, our magic, and who we are in our very core. None of us are immune to this, especially not Diana. So we're going to start by taking a look at the good stories that Diana told herself.
Can I do what I normally do in our podcast and interrupt, like with a side thing, just for 1 second? Because we hope that you'll come away from this understanding a way that you can access your inner power, because that's one of the overarching messages of All Souls for us. And we think the book series shows a great sort of trajectory about how you can examine yourself, and so I just wanted to throw that in there because that's part of what you were saying, but I'm just like, doing what I do, which is I add something else.
Well, and then I'll do what I do, which is just to add more.
Yes.
This topic couldn't be better timed. I think it's worth noting that we really thought hard about what we would want to present on and just kind of, I don't want to say present, just talk about in front of you all this year. And we thought about that in February. And so much has changed since then. And this topic that we are bringing forward is even more so true, and probably in a greater sense than it would have been in February when we started talking about it. Mm-hmm. We spend so much time with each other, helping to draw each other's stories out and feel comfortable in sharing stories with just the three of us. And discovering Deb's work and this amazing fandom has only helped us to do that in a greater sense. So to be able to talk about this today would have been better in person, of course, but it just feels like yet another round of therapy without a copay to be able to do this with you all.
Which is the point of our whole podcast and blog. All right, never mind. All right,
saving a lot of money. Yep.
All right, thank you, Nikki.
You're very welcome. So let's talk about, oh God, my hands got out of control, didn't they? So let's talk about the good stories, or sort of innocuous stories, that Diana told herself. So throughout A Discovery of Witches, Diana is adamant, was not going to use her magic to advance her career or her scholarship. She didn't use it, and she was denying her magical powers. But in the second chapter, we see Diana use her powers to get the book off the bookshelf. And by chapter 3, she's full on admitting that it's the 5th time that year she's used her magic. So, I mean, at that point, Diana's narrative probably wouldn't have included, her life narrative probably wouldn't have included magic, but she was clearly linked to it, and she was clearly using it, and it was clearly part of her life, even though she wasn't admitting it to herself just yet.
Mm-hmm. And she also, some other stories that she tells herself she tells herself she's smart, which, that's a good story to tell yourself, right? Believe that you have that power. And she tells herself that she's a good researcher. And so she has other stories as well that she sort of adds to her narrative that are positive stories.
Yeah, I think that her denying her witchiness and all of her powers, or just a refusal to want to use them to advance herself professionally, always stuck with me, because I feel like we do that to ourselves. Like, maybe it's something that we inherently have, but if we think that it might give us an advantage or a possible smarter way to do something, we feel like that's not the right way to do it. We should have to go through a lot of grueling struggle to maybe get to the end, which a lot of times life will hand you that to you anyway. But if it's a tool that you've been given and you get to carry it around in your toolbox, you should for sure use it. It just reminds me what I always tell people when I'm managing them at work, to work smarter, not harder. Like, we all work hard and never take away from that. But when there's an opportunity to work smarter, you should for sure lean into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and embrace it as part of your story. That's a positive, right? I mean, part of it is we get in our own way. We're going to talk more about that. But anyway.
Are we going to talk about that here, or are we just going to, is that going to be one of our counseling sessions?
I'm available. I mean, either way is fine. I'll come for both. I'm here for both.
Yeah. Put me on the sign-up sheet. So one of the other ways that stories are used in a good way in the books are the stories that the witches pass down from generations. And this includes the Coven in Elizabethan England, which is a group of women that I just kind of want to sit with, like, all the time. Maybe just visit them every weekend. But we also see stories that are passed down from the women in Diana's family. And actually, her grandmother is still there as far as Diana can see, and she's constantly sort of throwing in very much things like my grandmother would, just sarcastic, bitey comments. But that's one of the things that I love about Shadow of Night, is the Coven in Elizabethan England, and how those witches really talk about their history through storytelling. And I think, as a child of the South who grew up with lots of storytelling, that's a way to make your history real, right? You can look at a family tree and you can see all the lines drawn on charts, but to hear the stories of your ancestors and the things that they did, it just makes it real. It makes you part of that history in a way that other things just don't.
Right, and I think that sort of storytelling, is part of what you lose, right, as people pass on, is you lose sort of your circle of storytellers shrinks, and that's that's part of the challenge of that. It's because you don't have people who are sharing, or sort of you're telling a story and like, remember when, and then the other person jumps in, and you sort of build and sort of create this sort of fabric that gets frayed as people sort of leave that circle.
Yeah, and I think generational storytelling is evolving, and maybe not for the good, right? Maybe not for the better. But I will never forget when I found 2 times, and I know, Nikki, we've shared these moments together, and Janet, but in my grandma's house, my grandma was my soul twin. So to find in her house letters that she had shared with my grandfather early on in their dating years, but then after, when he was overseas fighting in World War II, just to be able to see sort of the depth of their relationship, but also to understand like how they raised a family, how they kept a home up, how they lived apart, and to understand a lot of where her strength and her resilience, as well as her stubbornness, might come from, to have lived that life experience. And I think, I better be writing things. Like, am I leaving behind a trail that my son can follow and be able to tell others? Because I feel like we're all so digitally minded now that I look around and I'm like, people leaving Snapchats to follow? I hope not. That's what I hope. I hope not. But I think that the art of long form penmanship is going by the wayside, and I hope not. But I think back to the way that Diana's tracing her history, to be able to see it both in Shadow of Night and in modern time in the other books. But and think, I hope that we're leaving behind as deep of a story to tell in written form that someone can find, so that a voice doesn't need to be interpreted. The game of telephone doesn't have to destroy it, that it's just there in its original intent and integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for the bad stories too. They follow us. Did you see how I did that segue?
You're always the queen of the segue.
It was seamless until you told us what you did.
That's also one of Janet's strong points.
Yeah, so there you go. Just aware of the time, anyhow.
So yes, good. Now we're on to bad.
Yes.
I should have filled this with whiskey.
Yes.
Light on whiskey, heavy on water. So many bad stories, and we had a hard time sort of picking these out of the books. But I think one of the things that sort of resonated with me was the stories that Matthew told himself about what a horrible, I was going to say human, horrible vampire he is.
Yeah.
And he had this sense of unworthiness. You know, he's this, as far as Diana's concerned, he's this very confident, dominant vampire, but inside him, he's got stuff eaten away. And so a lot of that is tied, for me, I think, is tied to his final moments with Philippe, where, spoiler alert, he's the last one with Philippe. And, you know, he offs him to get him out of his misery, basically. And I think he carried that with him for so many years, and just had a sense of unworthiness from it. And it became sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because he kept telling himself the story over and over again. And, you know, I'll bring it up again, as I always do, but anxiety's a storyteller. And anxiety rarely tells good stories.
You're making me already. I'm just like, let me apply some essential oils when you start doing that.
Should we have essential oil breaks?
Yeah, we do this while we're recording. It only seems right. Just make sure, get it all the places.
And guilt also.
Yeah.
Rarely tells a good story. And part of what he has is guilt as well. Just, you know, even though he did the right thing for Philippe, and also, you know, he has a tremendous guilt, you know, over the death of Blanca and his son. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was the plague, not, you know, him throwing them off a building or something. So, you know,
timely topic.
Yes, really. So those are the ways in which he holds himself back, because of the stories that he tells himself, or that he allows other people to tell and interpret their versions of that. You know, Diana does that as well. At a certain point, you know, she says she's a bad witch, right? I can't even do spells. I can't do this. I'm not, you know, she has a story that she tells herself about not doing it and not accepting it, but she also, which holds her back, but she also has a story where she says she's no good at it, right? And I think it's important that as we sort of try to understand ourselves better, to sort of look at the stories that we're told, or the stories that we tell, and try to understand which ones are real, what parts of them are real, and also, is that a story that you want to continue to hold on to? I'm going to tell a short story here, which is that when I was, to give an example, so I was in elementary school. I was the tallest and heaviest kid in my school until 6th grade, which is when my elementary school ended. Every year, we would march ourselves down to the nurse's office in a line, and the nurse would take your height and weight, and she would say it to the teacher, who would, you know, dutifully record it. In front of the whole class. And, you know, this was obviously one of my favorite days always. But in 5th grade, I went over 100 pounds. And I was the first person in my grade to do that. I was also...
And you got a prize?
Yeah. Well, here's the prize. I was also 5'2". So not what you would consider obese. But the nurse decided, instead of saying my height and weight out loud, she went over to the teacher and whispered it. And kids, being kids, immediately were like, "Wow, what's going on?" You know, etc. And one very clever young man said, oh, that's Janet the Planet. And that nickname stuck with me, of course, as it does with kids. But the key part of this story is at that moment in my head, I became fat.
Mm.
And I carried that story for decades. In fact, I'm not going to lie, I still struggle with it. And that's after a lot of therapy, you know. But my point is, and it influenced me in a lot of behaviors of I won't eat 3 meals, I won't eat dessert, or if I put dessert in my mouth, that's a bad thing in my head. You know, the whole interior monologue that we do and all those sorts of things. And at a certain point, actually, it was not that long ago, it was in the past, like maybe 5 years, I realized, wow, that story, A, wasn't true, and B, I don't actually have to hold on to that story anymore. Like, I can write a different ending to that story. I can rewrite that story and think about it differently. And I share this because I think that's both the power of storytelling, but also it shows how, you know, at a certain point, Matthew recognizes, you know, with help from Philippe and help from Diana, et cetera, that he doesn't have to hold on to sort of some of the stories that he's been telling himself around his guilt and anxiety and feelings with you know, with Blanca and Philippe, et cetera. And so if we look at the negative stories and think about them, we can think about ways to affect change in a more positive way.
I am signing up for your seminar.
Yes, at the end we're going to talk about some ways you can help rewrite your story. But anyway.
Damn, girl. I was not emotionally or mentally prepared for that, but that's amazing.
I was not either. And we were going to think about talking about the stories that mess you up for years. I'm pretty sure you just covered that too.
Yep. Chat.
So,
okay.
Oh my God. I was just going to say I'm not a Southern Baptist anymore because I always told myself I was because my parents did, but it turns out I'm
not. As it turns out, I'm also not a Catholic. I had no idea.
See?
I learned so much.
Look at us all rewriting our stories and thinking who we thought we were and how it influenced us, right? I mean, it's amazing how that stuff resonates and hangs in there, right?
It actually really is, and I think it's been one of the most enlightening parts of adulthood for me is to have a moment where you go, you know what? I don't have to do that anymore.
Right.
Nope, that's not me. That was somebody else. That was somebody else's idea of me, but no, I'm good.
That was somebody before therapy. At least in my case.
That was first husband, Nikki.
Yeah, right, really. 2 of the 3 of us had starter marriages. So, anyway. Yeah. I think it's time to move on to the next part.
I gotta tell you.
Namaste.
This is my favorite. And I need you to bear with me because I gotta read this. So, bear with me. Here we go. There we go. So, in A Discovery of Witches, there is this yoga scene that everybody who's read the books loves this scene. We all wanted to see it in the show. We know why it couldn't happen because it was too hard. We get that. But it still remains one of my favorite scenes. And it's when Diana was trying, at the end of the yoga class, Diana was trying to do Shavasana and she was freaking the hell out. And Amira, the yoga instructor, helped her through it. So I'm just going to read that little passage real quick. The hardest part of any practice for me was the final corpse pose, Shavasana. I found it nearly impossible to lie flat on my back without moving. The fact that everyone else seemed to find it relaxing only added to my anxiety. I lay as quietly as possible, eyes closed, trying not to twitch. A swoosh of feet moved between me and the vampire. Diana, Amira whispered, this pose is not for you. Roll over onto your side. My eyes popped open. I stared into the witch's wide black eyes, mortified that she had somehow uncovered my secret. Curl into a ball. Mystified, I did what she said. My body instantly relaxed. She patted me lightly on the shoulder. Keep your eyes open, too. I love this passage because it says so much about so many things. And I love yoga. I am the most least flexible person in the world. Shavasana, by the way, is my favorite pose. Because if anyone tells me to lie on my back and close my eyes, I'm cool. I don't even have to think of England. But I'm sorry, I can't help it.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
I have these moments in yoga class that, I take a yoga class where I'm kind of the youngest person there, which I thought was going to make me feel really good. It does not. Because these old ladies are short and they can touch their toes and all sorts of things that I can't do. And just a couple of weeks ago, we were in yoga class and we were trying to do crow pose. And I don't know if you know what crow pose is, but it's basically balancing your body on your hands with your feet kind of pretzeled up underneath you. I don't know. I can't do it. Never have been. Not going to do it either. And I just felt I've been doing yoga religiously for like 4 months, and I just felt so inadequate because all these old women were doing this, and I'm just like, oh, you suck. And then a few minutes later, the teacher was like, okay, we're going to work on balance now. Let's do our tree pose. And I'm like, I'm a tree. So and we do our tree pose, and I am just completely focused, still as anything, and I look around and all the people in the class are struggling. They're falling over, they're losing their balance. And I'm just like, I'm not a crow, I'm a tree.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
and I love that. I'll be a tree. That's fine.
I think
So
you can be
accepting who you are within the parameters of whatever the thing is that you're doing,
Yeah, I would agree. You be who you're called to be, and so much of Diana all throughout the series, but in Discovery of Witches, like I'd hit a moment, I'd be like, oh yeah, no, this is how you're the most relatable to me. This is the one that stuck out the most to me as someone who for years has tried yoga, and I want yoga to be my thing. Like Nikki goes, she sends us polos, she looks amazing, she looks zen, and I'm like, I need that. I can't ever seem to get there. I was a competitive athlete for years, and so my body is hardwired for like pounding and sweating and a lot of high heart rate. And so the idea of forced relaxation is the way I was looking at it. It's so hard for me, and it's really annoying because I think I need it desperately. But it's a couple times like I would go and there would be someone exactly as you're discussing, where it would be like, I look over, we're doing yoga, someone's balancing on their head. And I'm like, am I supposed to be balancing on my head? Like, I can't balance on my head. And for so long, that would kind of paralyze my enjoyment of it. But then I finally just was like, no, you stretch however you want to stretch. She can balance on her head because that's what's making her feel right. You don't have to balance on your head. You do whatever you want to take advantage of this time that you've set aside with some sort of intention. And I feel that way too about Shavasana because I love a nap. I love laying flat. I love lying flat. I love just relaxing in general. But there's something about like, and now this is the time that's set aside for that, where people would talk about it and radiance would just flow out of them about Shavasana. And so I honestly laid there and was like, unicorns are going to fly overhead. There's going to be like pixie dust flying down. Something's going to happen. I'm going to leave my body. It's going to be amazing. Like I'm going to wake up and there's going to be cupcakes raining from heaven. And none of that happened. And so I was very confused. And then I realized like, no, it's what you need to get out of it. So if you just lying there in silence is all that happens, fantastic. But it was just the moment of recognizing like I might not be able to get out of, like I might not look the same in a Shavasana pose as someone else, or I might not be as deep into a meditative state, but it is still working for me. Or I have many a times, as Diana did, crawled over on my side in like a fetal position and tried to go to sleep because that's what speaks to my body. Mm-hmm. So this passage in this book just made me love her even more. And we were barely into the book when this happened.
I had a yoga class with an online instructor very shortly after we all were working remotely, and one of the things that she talked about in the session was going just up to the edge and then backing off, and how in yoga you don't want to push through, and in life you really don't want to push through the pain, because when you do that, you're doing damage to your body that maybe isn't fixable or will take a long time to fix. And so the goal is to just find the edge and then back away from it. And that's really stuck with me for the last couple of months, that you probably aren't going to get many rewards for just pushing through and then breaking yourself down. But if you can at least acknowledge where the edge is and go, okay, you know what? That's my limit. I'm going to back off now. That's going to make a better you for you, but for all the people around you too. And if you work in an office or you're the boss of people, like some of us are, it's going to be better for them too.
And sometimes that edge changes too. Be aware as you sort of do this kind of self-exploration, what's the edge now isn't necessarily the edge in 10 years or
Absolutely.
whatever. So that's another part of it. Before we move to the next section.
Also, never stand on the edge and take a selfie. That's my PSA. People, the stories of people that love to stand on the edge and show you they're on the edge. That doesn't go well either.
It does
We
not.
can love you from the back.
It does not. I don't want to read about you on CNN.
I don't.
Okay.
So we're going to move on to unbinding our tongues. And you have to forgive me. I wrote these slides, and I must have been in a very cheeky mood when I did it. So forgive me. But I really love the visual about associated with Diana being bound. Her magic was bound for a good part of, well, for all of the first book and a good part of the second book too. And so that those portions of those books were about Diana identifying her magic and then trying to unleash the ties that her parents had put on her. And this one speaks very much to me, the idea of unbinding our tongues, because I think as I've gotten older, mine has come more and more unbound. But one of the specific examples from the book is Diana grew up in a house full of magic. She witnessed her mother perform spells, and it both terrified and fascinated Diana. And she didn't want to talk about magic anymore because of what happened to her parents. And she didn't want to talk about a lot of things, actually. But as her relationship with Matthew progressed, she became more and more willing and able to speak her mind because of the trust that they had found in each other. And one of the things that I see from the books is how her brave words, finding her tongue, really helped her save her relationship with Matthew, especially in Shadow of Night, when they were in England. She confronted Matthew and said, if you're angry with me, say it. If I've done something you don't like, tell me. If you want to end this marriage, have the courage to end it cleanly so that I might be able to recover from it. Because if you keep looking at me as though you wish we weren't married, you're going to destroy me. And that is some pretty damn straight talk right there. And that takes a lot of courage to say that to anyone, especially someone that you love, who you're in a different time period with, and maybe don't have a clear escape route if things go south. And I just, I reflect on the bravery of that and how difficult it can be to speak truthfully to people, but how important it is to sort of further our relationships and to deepen those relationships, because a good relationship has to be built on trust and honesty.
I'm going to guess that I've been told before that if something is trapped and you don't even know you want to say it, or you do want to say it, that energy is blocked and you will get headaches and TMJ and all sorts of things from here to here, right? So if you're ever having like neck, shoulder, anything, pain,
Cold sore.
what?
Cold sore.
shoulders, anything from like the nose to right above your like clavicle, right? Basically, they say there's something trapped in there that needs to come out. And if you don't let it out, you can imagine how debilitating that is. So I read this scene thinking that, like, who's sitting there with that sort of just physical angst right here? Or even worse, like if you live with it so long that it doesn't even make it up this far and it just sits in your gut, causing all sorts of stress and problems. So I think sometimes I loved this because of the directness of it and because it was very clear, like there is something to be said. But I know we've talked about before, sometimes when something's trapped there and you're like, I think I've said all the things, I don't know what's in there, but your subconscious is telling you there's still more to come out that you're trapping in there. So being able to just go to even a deeper level to be able to just get all the, what I would call the ring rust or the cobwebs out, because no one stands to benefit when all that's sitting in there.
And sometimes that's about sort of admitting it to yourself about something about you. In other words, we've given examples with Diana and Matthew, speaking truly to each other. But we all do that thing where we don't let ourselves admit what actually we're feeling or want to be or whatever. And so that's part of it too.
I mean, I wish I could drink from a heart vein to have that truth come out in a lot easier way. It seems easier.
I like that shortcut.
Yeah. I mean, we talked earlier about working smarter, not harder. So, I mean, can we all just have some heart vein release?
It would be much easier than having to actually formulate the words.
Yeah, I'd just kind of sit with my hands back and my feet up and be like, take what you need. It's great. That sounded not quite right, but in the context of what we were talking. Welcome, All Souls Witchy Women.
I grew up in a family that was not, they were not very forthcoming with things that might be hurtful. And I didn't really understand that you were actually, I mean, that it was actually beneficial to tell people the truth. You just didn't say out loud anything that might hurt somebody's feelings. And that causes weird families.
Oh, yeah.
Because
my family's variation on that was there was never anything wrong.
Oh, well, yeah.
So there was never anything to discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my family's is that there are so many wild tongues, said with love, in case anyone's purchased a virtual ticket and watching. But I came out last in a family of very outspoken, wonderful, lovely, loving people, but last. And so it felt like I took the last role that was available, which is to be the amiable peacekeeper, to keep everyone playing nicely in the sandbox and, kind of use all the diplomatic skills I could amass. My mom is the same way, but I think that gets tiring. That's really tiring because sometimes you're like, it's my turn. I want to be the one without a filter. Like, why do I have to clean up the messes? So I think that even in recognizing your family dynamic, but choosing your own course, like you don't have to play the only part that's available, right? It's needed, but it's not needed all the time. Nobody needs to be 100% of what that chosen part, like, oh, you're the loud one. Oh, you're this one. Everybody gets to be shades of that, or else you can imagine what a volatile situation, or just how stale that becomes after a while when you're like, but I would like to speak up and not be the peacekeeper today. So I think that's what I was taking away as we were talking about unbinding your tongues. I'm like, oh yeah, I've learned that skill over the years. Like I will keep it together, and I will use the tongue in a diplomatic way when needed. But sometimes you just want to go off and like be the one that's like, oh, she's okay. We've rattled her today. There it is.
Yeah, everybody steer clear of her for a while.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It would. I'm happy to pass along an essential oil as I'm raging as like a shield, but I should get a turn to rage every once in a while.
That's my segue. Yeah. And sometimes one of the ways you can unbind your own tongue, either interiorly or literally, is by understanding which to trust, your hearts or heads.
We have a heart.
Did I miss a Janet segue? What did it look like? Show it again for those in the back. Come on. Oh, that's a good one. Thumbs. I thought she was hitchhiking. Go ahead.
Get the hell out of here. You're trapped. You're not going anywhere, lady. Oh my God. We all have heads. We all have hearts. Sometimes they tell us different things. They're rarely in agreement. And sometimes it's hard to tell which one to trust. And so very many examples of this in Deb's books. One of the ones that I was thinking about was towards the end of Shadow of Night, when Diana knows that they're leaving the 1590s. She knows that they can't take Jack and Annie with them, and she's sort of secured Annie's care, but she really wants to take care of Jack and make sure that he's cared for the rest of his life. Yeah, that went a little awry. But so she confronted Hubbard, and who's, you know, he's not a guy I would want to trust with a child, but she went to him, and she secured his care, and she got a promise from him, and it was really, it was a risky move on her part, and her heart was for Jack, but her head told her, you got to be careful with this guy because he's a huckster. But she used a combination of her head and her heart. She used Philippe's words to guide her. Just think and stay alive. And she did what she needed to do. And she got Hubbard's promise to care for Jack. She gave him a tiny bit of information and a tiny little drop of blood, and it worked out. But it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's that combination of knowing sort of, is this the moment to go with my head? Is this the moment to go with my heart? And heart to me is really sort of, your intuition, and having faith that what you're feeling that's driving you forward is enough to make whatever it is you're trying to do happen. And we've all had challenges where that's part of what we doubt ourselves, right? I mean, and I have lived through this myself many times, through things of just like, sometimes the only way out is through, and you just have to keep going. And there are various points that, when they're fighting and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, and they're and everybody's against them. It's like, well, this is the plan, well, that's the plan, well, this is the plan, right? And like, really, at a certain point, you're just like, all right, well, that's the plan we're going with, and we have to believe that that's going to work. And we have to believe, and I'm a strong believer that if you have strong beliefs, you help to manifest what happens, and which I think is our own form of magic. You have to work, but you also help to manifest it just by believing the only other solution is the one ahead of me. So,
I also, building on that, Janet, I love this example specifically too, because of the mention of Philippe's words playing through her head, because in the end, it's our own individual choice, knowing which one to trust, right? Or a blend of both, or whatever it is. Like, we have to trust our own intuition and make the choice for ourselves, but understanding that those that we put in our circle of life, they're, I'm not going to say their input or their influence, but just their voices are in your head as you're choosing to make the decisions you make. You choose it for yourself, but like, the idea that you can hear the wise words, or you can hear the naysayer, or you can hear the words of love or support, all of that plays in as you're kind of leaning in and going, which one do I do? Which do I go with? In the end, you make the choice that you're going to make, but it makes you feel like as you're making that individual choice on your own journey, that you're not alone on it, because those people have been with you and their voices are circling in your head as you're making the choices. So it feels like on the path that you might be on as an individual, there are still others with you.
right. Which is great. It's one way we can affect change through really challenging times, is that sort of innate understanding that while we feel very alone, or not.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like Diana with Philippe, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah.
And I just wanted to talk briefly about one of the other examples is in A Discovery of Witches when Diana meets Matthew. Everybody around Diana is warning her to stay away from him. Jillian, Sarah, Emily, Knox, they're all saying this is a bad guy, you got to stay away from him, and her head's hearing that, but her heart is drawn to him in ways that she can't articulate even to herself. And I sort of I really love that, because sometimes you meet a person, partner, friend, whatever. Sometimes you meet a person, and there's a part of you that's drawn to them, and you can't explain it with your head. You can only explain it with your heart. That you are connected to this person in, I'm going to say, a magical way, and it might be hard to trust those sort of signs that you're being given, but I think it's important to, because um, I am a person who does not make friends easily because I have a healthy distrust of basically the world, and so it's hard for me to get to know somebody and to let people in. And occasionally I get these signals going, you know what, this person's okay. And for me, it's easy to ignore those and just go, you don't know what you're talking about, shut up. It's harder for me to give in and say, okay, I'm going to trust here. But when I do, I'm always rewarded.
Mm.
Right. Right.
And so, that's a thing to learn to give into, even though it might be hard for some of us, the Scorpios.
I was going to say, I'm so glad that you leaned into trusting to allow Janet and me into your world, into your heart, into your circle. Because I do think of you lovingly when I see that T-shirt that says "I like my cat" and maybe 3 people. Um, and
I really need that T-shirt.
I know, counting, and I'm like, we just made the cut. That's awesome. I'm kidding with you, but I think that's as someone who has benefited from exactly what you're saying. I had a single individual in mind when you were telling that story, which I imagine you do as well. But I then was like, I could put Janet and me into that category as well, for allowing yourself to sort of trust and build something special together as friends and as partners in this. So love it. Thanks to your heart and your head.
Yes. And so I'm going to segue to the last pit, unless you have something else.
Go for it.
We wanted to give you something that you could have as a takeaway, assuming that you are inspired and are thinking about ways that you'd like to try to access more of your inner power, whether it's your inner witch or your demon or your vampire. And so we're going to leave you with a couple of exercises or things that you could do after this is over if you want to help sort of explore that. This is an exercise I do with my writing students, and so I'm going to tell you, it's the toolbox exercise. And basically, just set your timer. Don't edit anything. Don't think about what you're writing, but set your timer for 3 minutes and make a list of all of your strengths, all of your attributes, every skill that you have that you really love and that's sort of part of your life and every day. And, again, just keep writing until the 3 minutes are over. Then, for your next toolbox, you're going to take the set your timer for 3 minutes, and you're going to make a list of all the things you wish you had, all the skills, all the strengths. It obviously looks at going into your weaknesses, the things that you wish you had, all right? And then for your third exercise, you're going to make a list. You're going to pick one of the things that's in toolbox 2 that you want to put into toolbox 1. And you're going to make a list of 3 to 5 steps that you can take to move it from one box to the other box. And I would suggest make the steps small, right? Just if your first step is I'm going to lose 50 pounds, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably not going to be successful as the first step, right? I also would encourage you not to do weight, but that's like another whole thing. So, but it's a really, really helpful exercise, and it's also one that you can do periodically, right? And you can sort of check in, like, wow, I moved those 3 things. That's awesome. Like, that was important to me. And it's a way of sort of changing your own story and sort of your own feelings around yourself and certain things. So my other suggestion is to take some time, find a quiet space, a place where you can be uninterrupted for a while and just kind of let your mind go. I always set a timer on my phone because, and I always set it for 3 minutes because you know what? Anybody can write for 3 minutes. Again, don't edit, don't change, but think about, like, what's a story that you would like to rewrite? What's a story about yourself that you would like to have a different ending to? Or a story that you just don't want to tell anymore? And, it's not something that necessarily in one session of writing is going to become clear to you, but you can write around this. You can write around it whenever you want to. And just try to go as deeply as you can, because as you do those kinds of things, it starts to carve out a pathway for how you might rewrite a story or how you might affect change, and enable yourself to have more of that power and sort of feeling of self-worth and strength. Okay. And then my third final one is I'm a big, big fan of mantras. I could tell you a story about a couple for me that have really had quite an impact in my life, but I don't think we have time. So sometime when you see me at the next con, we can sit down and have a drink and I'll tell you a story, right?
Yeah, seriously.
But pick a mantra towards a goal that you might have. And it could be one of these things relating to your toolbox, right? And every day, say that mantra to yourself. Every day. It can be the first thing, but when you wake up in the morning, it can be the first thing, when you start to, whatever. It's some ritual that starts your day. But say it every day. And then, I think you'll be surprised pleasantly that, over time, that mantra starts to become who and what you are, or who and what you want to be. And that's it.
I want to go to Janet's writing class. Oh, I really do. I really also want people to be able to see you at the next con in person. That means I could see you at the next con in person.
Oh, God. From your lips to God's ears, we have got to make that happen.
I'm just going to do all the emojis in real life.
Right.
Also, just checking, is go screw yourself a mantra?
I'm going to suggest that maybe you want to go with a more positive one, but okay. You could probably rework that to make it work.
She was asking for a friend. It wasn't for her.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. For whoever's thinking that. Yeah. So we should probably now move to final thoughts.
We probably should. Do you guys have anything else you want to share? Because I'm about to thank some people if you don't.
You should.
Okay. Let's get on with the thank yous. We just want to say a huge, enormous, ginormous thank you to the fabulous people who do the goddesses work at All Souls Con. They have taken the lemons that is a pandemic and they are making some wonderful lemonade out of it. We also want to thank Deborah Harkness for her gift of words that keeps us inspired and able to talk about our books long after we've closed the covers. And finally, thank you for being here and for taking the time to join this panel. We know that people have virtual meeting and social gathering fatigue, so we're grateful that you not only chose to spend the time at the virtual All Souls Con, but that you visited our little corner of it, and we really appreciate it. So thank you.
Hi, ladies. That was
Hello.
So much fun. Thank you so much for being a part of it. The thing that I really love about you guys is that I'm sitting there with you in your living rooms and just enjoying this really great conversation. So thank you for inviting all of us into your living room. That was just great, and that's why I'm a fan.
Thank you.
Thanks.
But we do have some questions that have popped up, and so I'd like to get going on that. And I'm going to take the first one just because I can. Okay, so Diana is a historian, right? And she reads hundreds of stories. And yet, there doesn't seem to be a lot of storytelling between her and Sarah and Em. You know, what do you think is preventing that? I mean, they're family. What do you think is preventing that?
I think that it's because they're all, to some extent, spellbound. And not, I mean that in not the literal sense, the way Diana is, but I feel like, when a secret is held, it seeps out into other behaviors, I think. And I think it has potentially, affected some of how they share things generally with her. And also, Diana has not sort of sent the vibe for at least, the beginning of the series that she's like, oh yeah, I want to hear all about the witch stuff. Like, she's sending the vibe of like, I don't want to hear any of the witch stuff. So I think that sort of is part of it, is myself. So that's my 2 cents.
I have a different take. I think it's trauma.
Oh, that's
I know.
interesting. Yeah.
I think it's a shared trauma. They've gone through the losing Diana's parents. There's some guilt there because there's secrets that Emily knows that she's not shared with anybody, at least in the show. And so I think everybody has sort of tried to compartmentalize as much of that past as they can, and just kind of like Ashley was talking about earlier, just shove it down. Just keep shoving it further and further down. And if you don't talk about it, you don't have to deal with it. Because in telling stories about their family, they were going to have to at some point deal with all of that stuff that was so hurtful and caused them so much pain. And that's my
Okay, well, this is the point in our podcast where one of us says, "Oh, well, Nikki, that's brilliant," and we don't actually forget whatever we others said. No,
Pretty much.
that's awesome. I love that. I love that theory.
Okay. Ashley, you have anything to add to that?
No, not as smart as those two. Generally, that's just our general mo. But there's part of me too that thinks you've got strong, independent women in most cases. If we're talking about Diana and her aunt specific, or just characters in general who, are certainly there for each other in comfort and support. But I think that they do so much very independently. So there's part of me that just wonders if they think that because of all this intuitive power and like nonverbal communications that they pass to each other, I think about like the aunts knowing that there's something off in England, right? All the way from New England.
off in England.
Yeah, something's off in England. I'm in New England. Something's off in old England. So I just think that there's probably a part of them that's like, well, you can tell, like without sharing, it's been shared, or just and it aids a little bit in Nikki, your theory of suppressing down. It's like, I don't need to tell you because and I think that's a little bit lazy and kind of dangerous if you think about it, because think of the benefit that could come from having that more open dialogue of sharing history.
Exactly. And then that brings me to this other thing. The vampires are famous for their, it's not my tale to tell, right? So how do you even begin to tell a vampire or a human, that's not really helpful? That you do need to share your stories, right?
Oh.
Well, see, I happen to love that thing. That's not my tale to tell. That's not my story to tell. I have like completely incorporated that into my life. Since reading these books, I'm like, okay, that's brilliant, because it's stepping back and sort of saying, maybe I shouldn't tell this story. Maybe this is actually this person's story. And so I'm actually kind of a fan of that, but I don't think the opposite of that's not my story to tell is you don't tell any stories. Yeah. I think it still enables storytelling and sort of sharing that sort of potential understanding that could come from it. But I do think it's a good way to sort of decide, like, well, am I the one who's supposed to drop this bomb? Anyway.
Yeah, I know we've talked about this before too, because what if the person whose story it is to tell dies? And then does that story die with them, or can it still live on because you see that, to Janet's point, it's not black and white. There is some gray area of, there is no harm to be had by this story. It actually is more harmful to not have the truth, or just the benefit of whatever is in that to be shared among those that are left. So I like the aim for the middle.
Peacemaker that she is.
See? God.
Right.
First go Janet. Oh, Janet.
Okay, I have something from Adri. She says that everyone's stories contain a mix of both the flattering and unflattering, happy and unhappy parts. But in choosing which parts of the stories that you want to keep, and pressured like most people by the world that values positive stories, what do each of you do to ensure that you're telling your whole stories and hold on, and not editing out the less than flattering or happy parts entirely?
I'm okay. I'm gonna start, because I'm gonna tell you, I love to tell stories, and these two can tell you that I go off on tangents all the time, and they're always stories. And to my family's horror, I love to tell all the bad things about me. I love to tell. I mean, I just, all the stuff where I tripped and fell, or the button fell off my blouse, and I had to staple a dress back together at work one day. All the stuff that you kind of try to keep
One
hidden.
of my favorites.
I sent them a picture of me stapling a dress right
favorites.
before an interview. But I personally, I take a lot of joy in that kind of stuff, because I think it puts people at ease. Because we always try to hide that stuff. And I talk a lot about anxiety, because a lot of people who have anxiety are anxious about it, but they don't want to tell people, because they don't want people to act differently or react differently to them when they tell it. But I just put that stuff out there because I feel like maybe it makes it easier for somebody else to tell a story like that, or who has a thing that's happened to them. They can go, "Oh God, I'm not the only one. Thank you." And so I kind of, in my midlife crisis, I've just decided I'm going to put all that shit out there. And if there is something that somebody can take away from it, cool. And if not, that's fine too.
And I think the other part is too, is that if you put the negative out there, what can happen from it, depending on how you're telling the story, is a positive conversation, right? With whomever's hearing the story, who may be hearing the negative part for the first time, or whatever. I mean, so there's potential there for positive movement or change around the story that can benefit both people. It doesn't mean necessarily it's going to be like, a super smooth moment necessarily, but I think that, and sometimes it may take more than one conversation in order to actually suss out the story and sort of, get to some, place of where you're both comfortable around it. But, I am with Nikki. I think it's important. I also think that when we hold back on certain kinds of stories, we are actually doing a disservice to the world, to achieve better understanding around things. My mother was an alcoholic. I'm completely open about that and have conversations with people about it when it's appropriate, et cetera. It's not like I meet people and go, "Hi, my mom was an alcoholic and it was awful." That's not it. But the point is, I don't think there's a reason to hide that, because not everybody, but a lot of people have had things in their families. And if you share something like that, then there can be, it can be opening up sharing. I have a son with schizophrenia. I'm completely open about that. I think it's important. The stigma around mental health issues in this country is unconscionable. And the only way it's going to change is if people say, yes, this exists. So, anyway.
What about you, Ashley?
I agree with them completely, generally. As Janet's husband pointed out, do you all ever have a differing opinion? But specifically on this, no, because I've always been very transparent about the highs, lows, buffaloes, as I like to call them in our household, but certainly the moments of soaring and the moments of bottoming out, for the reasons that they've stated. I will say that one of the things, though, that I do have adopted for myself is to sort of read the room, to know, am I in a safe space to tell the story in the way that I need it to come out, or in the deepest way to tell all the details of it, right? And it's not so much because I need to keep up appearances, but because I appreciate different perspectives, and because I was just sort of like, if I'm going to go to a place of vulnerability, is this a room that's going to be receptive to it? And I use room loosely, whatever it might be, a conversation, social media, at work, whatever it might be. But what I love is that I've surrounded myself with wonderful, like lifelong or new or whatever it may be, friends and family that I know that no matter what, like, you're going to see all the sides of it. And specifically at work as a manager, I let all the colors fly, because I need people to see that you can mess up and still come out of it with some grace and understanding, and come forward, and to not hide that stuff. So generally when someone comes to me with professional paralysis, I immediately just start by being like, that reminds me of, and then putting it right back on some time that I flopped, because they see that you can go through something like that and still stand up and keep moving forward, and moving up. And so for the benefit of people in that way, I never hide the ugly. And then for whatever might be for me personally, and any sort of struggle or journey that I'm going through, I just know that I've got like this wonderful bench of people to sit on the bench and yell the story down it, or just to tap into one or a few of them to be able to have like the therapy session that you need. But I'm not a big fan of putting filters up. I don't really like social media, Instagram filters, like we're hiding what we actually look like as our true selves. It's never been my thing. I certainly am not going to take wrinkles off the face and some of the things, because I think they tell their stories, right? The things that we've been through are written on our face as well. And so why we would try to hide that as a nonverbal way to tell your story is beyond me.
Janet, I just want to interject that story you told, being in elementary school and being, the bigger kid and stuff. I went through the same thing. So as soon as you told that story, I was just, wow, I can relate to what you're saying. And it took a lot of self-talk, over the years to get to a better space. So I know exactly what that feels like. So thank you for sharing that. That really helped.
Well, thank you. And we just now illustrated how storytelling interiorly and exteriorly is a good thing.
Exactly. Okay, we have one last question here. This is from Laura. The ability not to put anyone in a box could be a magical power. What do you think?
The ability, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question. The ability not to put somebody in a box.
Not to surround a person with, preconceived ideas and what have you. That could be a magical power, right? As she's saying. So, yeah, what do you think about that? What are your thoughts about that?
I mean, it's sort of interesting because whenever we meet someone, I have a visual of when you meet someone, it's like a computer scan. You're like trying to get information, and as you get information, it's building a box around them, right? And so I think that is a gift to not be able to do that, and it's hard, because for me, I always try to want to make sense of a situation, and I do that by gathering data and then trying to build my own narrative. And sometimes I'm way off, and I feel terrible. I feel awful about it. I need a class. I need a Janet class to keep me from doing that, to help me gain that magical power, because it's hard not to do that.
Well, one thing that can help, I think, is recognizing I don't want to be in a box. Like,
Right.
I know that certainly lots of people have placed me in boxes. Like, oh, she's that like outspoken, scary, strong woman. Let's just say that's my work box. Okay. You know, right. I mean, we could all identify, right? Or she's this, you know, this way or that way. She never smiles, you know, that sort of thing. So but if we can, I guess part of it for me would be just being aware of, I don't want to be in a box. So I should think about making sure I'm not placing anybody that I'm meeting in a box, because it's a way of, I think, Ashley, you're going to sing your Witch in a Box song now, right?
It's a witch in a box. Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, if you listen to our podcast, there's a fair amount of singing by Ashley, but also the Witch in the Box thing in the show is a moment for us. So that's all I'm going to say.
Also, just to clarify, singing.
Yeah.
Singing. Yeah. I think that that's such a wonderfully timed question to talk about putting people in a box, given I feel like what is the state of the world right now, and just assuming that we know things based on what we can see from the outside, right? We just make instant choices on, will you look like that, or you live there, or you live, you know, so you believe in this, or you follow this candidate, so this must mean you must be this, this, and this. And I feel like it's such a dangerous time to continue that pattern of putting people in boxes by all means. But I think it certainly also goes back to what we were talking about a lot, like being able to tell your own story. And so I think as like part of the tool to combat someone putting you in a box is to being able to speak up and tell your own story and share it. And to sort of break down the walls of that box. Like, certainly don't let someone put you in it. Don't be the person that puts someone in it, but have the inner power where you can, or the network of support around you to help break down the walls of the box that someone might be smothering you in.
Okay, that's the best answer.
What she said.
That's our moment of like, Ashley, that's brilliant.
Generally, there's like one an episode, and
No.
I'm like, are we done? We're good.
Ladies, thank you so much for answering these questions, and again for inviting us into your living room. This has been wonderful. So thanks from all of us at All Souls Con to you, and be waiting for the next one.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.